Present. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor! Halt! Ready! Right! Ladies and gentlemen, in recognition of the National Commission on World War I Memorials, we will now wait in a moment of silence for the ringing of the bells of peace as the nation mourns the centennial of the Great War. Detail, octane! Hoot!
Call out. Back up safe.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to read this. Today will be a covered ceremony. The Defense Authorization Act of 2008-9, signed by President Bush, has amended Section 301(b)(1) of Title 36 United States Code, allowing all veterans and military personnel not in uniform to render the proper hand salute during the raising, lowering, passing of the colors, or during our national anthem. At this time, I would like to call forward President of the Hingham High School Veterans Appreciation Club, Khalil Al-Nakal, to read the proclamation from Governor Baker.
Whereas, since the Commonwealth colonial days, thousands of men and women have served our country in defense of freedom and liberty. And whereas, on November 11th, 1918, the armistice was signed in the forest of Compiègne by the Allied nations and Germany, ending World War I, the war to end all wars, after 4 years of conflict. And whereas, since that day, every November, people around the nation have gathered to honor our veterans. And whereas there are approximately 388,000 veterans living in Massachusetts. And whereas today we are reminded of the great sacrifices and contributions our veterans have made to our country. And whereas we honor and salute those who served our country throughout the generations with honor, patriotism, and courage. And whereas it is appropriate that all Massachusetts citizens remember the bravery of those who served their country, so that their dedication and sacrifice serve as a reminder of the cost of our freedom. And whereas in November 2018, the world will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended the fighting in World War I at 11 a.m., November 11th, 1918. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Now, therefore, I, Charles D. Baker, Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim November 11th, 2018 to be Veterans Day, and urge all the citizens of the Commonwealth to take cognizance of this event and participate fittingly in its observance. Given at the Executive Chamber in Boston, this 11th day of November, in the year of 2018, and of the independence of the United States of America in 242nd, by His Excellency Charles D. Baker, Governor of the Commonwealth, Karen Polito, Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth, William Francis Galvin, Secretary of the Commonwealth. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you.
like to call the program to order today and ask you please to rise for the presentation of the colors by our police and fire departments, and also the singing of our national anthem by Hingham High School student athlete Nick Capodalupo.
Present! Halt!
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Order! Halt!
Now I welcome Hingham Veterans Council member Jay Ippolito for the invocation. Jay?
Detail. Break.
Almighty God, we gather here today on this 100th anniversary of Veterans Day to honor those that have served our country so that we may continue to live our lives in freedom. Help us to be constantly reminded of this gift and for the sacrifice that was made so willingly by these brave men and women. We ask that you bless them always and help them to walk with courage and pride, knowing that they have done their part to keep us in a free and democratic society. Lord, we pray that you bring them peace and love always. Amen.
Please be seated. We have with us today a number of elected officials and guests. We have from our Board of Selectmen, our Chairman Paul Healy and Selectman Mary Power, our Town Clerk, Eileen McCracken, our Town Administrator, Tom Mayo, our Assistant Town Administrator, Michelle Monsegur, our Police Chief, Glenn Olson, and his Deputy, David Jones, our Fire Chief, Stephen Murphy, and Deputies Billy Powers and Lou LaChance. On behalf of all citizens of Hingham, I welcome you. I welcome you to this, the 2018 observance of Veterans Day. As we do each year, we gather together as one to recognize those men and women who have set aside their personal pursuits to answer a call to service in our nation's armed forces, committing themselves to preserve the freedoms that we cherish and to protect our very way of life. 100 years have passed since the guns of the Great War, World War I, fell silent. As we know all too well, those guns would not remain silent for long. Conflict would commence again, and again young Americans would be called upon to duty, and again they would respond with a resounding yes. And not just in World War II, but in Korea, in Vietnam, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and elsewhere, on land, on sea, and in the air, serving selflessly, both here and at home and abroad, in times of war and in times of peace. As we gather in this safe and secure place that we call home, we pay fitting tribute to those who have served. And we do so knowing that at this moment, members of the armed forces of the United States are in harm's way, many in far-off lands willingly bearing the burden of protecting our safety and our security. Today, let us also express our gratitude to the families of our veterans, family members who have borne the burden of separation from a loved one, the warm presence of a spouse, a parent, a child, and who have borne that burden with courage and commitment, shared with the veteran, a commitment to service and sacrifice. In assembling in Hingham, Massachusetts on November the 11th, we are rightly heeding the words of President Eisenhower, spoken in 1954, when that veteran called on all Americans to observe November the 11th as Veterans Day, saying, "On that day, let us solemnly remember the sacrifices of all who fought so valiantly on the seas, in the air, and on foreign shores to preserve our heritage of freedom, and let us reconsecrate ourselves to the task of promoting an enduring peace so that their efforts shall not have been in vain." I now invite the Hingham High School Band, under the direction of Brian Sakata, to perform the Armed Forces Medley, and as is our tradition, to have the veterans rise as your particular service song is played. now invite Paul Healy, Chairman of the Hingham Board of Selectmen, to make remarks.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Morning. Thank you for attending. I'm offering a perspective of close to 6 decades in this town. I hope you enjoy it. In mid-October, I was at the Fort Hill Cemetery to pay tribute to the life of Herbert Foss. I had the pleasure of speaking to a great-grandchild of Mr. Foss. She told me that her family only learned that Mr. Foss had earned the Medal of Honor after his death. I was struck by that and reflected on the time that I've had here in this community with citizens that have served in uniform. Some served in time of war, some in time of peace. But the common theme uniting all of them was that they did what they had to do to serve this country. They simply chose to get on with the rest of their lives upon their return to civilian life. But these qualities of citizenship, whether it be in uniform or how they live their lives here in Hingham, serve to enrich us as a community and a country. I wish to share with you some examples of the people that I've met along the way. For some, the Cafe Tosca on North Street is a place to enjoy a pleasant night out. But once upon a time ago, it was Quinn's Gulf gas station and bicycle repair shop. As a paper boy with morning and evening route, my bike needed a lot of repair. And I would invariably bring it down to the Quinns. Bob, Bill, and Jack. They were quiet men, running a family business with little fanfare. Without exception, they were always kind and patient. I liked them. Only decades later did I learn that these men all served with distinction in World War II. Nothing in the store ever signaled to me that Bob Quinn earned the Silver Star in the Philippines. A bronze oak leaf cluster signifying the awarding of a second Silver Star, and a Purple Heart while fighting in the Solomons in Luzon in New Guinea. As I watched his brother Bill in the garage, I could never have dreamed that he was once part of a super fortress, a B-29 flying bombing missions over the Empire of Japan. And his brother Jack was a mechanic working on our aircraft in the China-Burma-India theater. To me, they were kindly gentlemen I could rely on, dependable, and in the epitome of how to conduct oneself in the community. When I take my bike along that childhood paper route, I had a customer at 34 Garrison Road. A blue star hung in that door. And puzzlement turned to sadness when it became a gold star. It was the home of Curtis Chase. He was a young lieutenant. He was slated to go to Harvard when his tour of duty was done in Vietnam, but that was not to be. He was killed there. For a young boy, the knowledge that Mrs. Chase's son would never return brought home the reality of the war. In the time since then, I've passed by that house many times. In fact, I walked by it today on my way up here. And I always think of Lieutenant Chase, and I've tried my best to serve you in a way that would make him pleased. When I got too old for the paper route, I worked for Charles Cushing. That's a name that should be familiar to most. A longtime Hinghamite, and like so many of his generation after December 7th, 1941, he served this country in uniform. He returned to the center, got on with his life, served as a call firefighter, served as a member of the light board. But the most important part of him was as a model inspiring a true sense of community, where all were welcome and all were treated with respect and dignity. Those of us who worked at Charlie's knew that he was on the island of Tinian, but not much more. It was only after his death that we got to see his war book, generously provided to us by his daughter. In that war book were pictures of the B-29 superfortresses. One of those pictures was the Enola Gay. His service, like that of the Quinn brothers and millions of their generation, was something that was rendered without hesitation in a time of need. Again, like the Quinns, he had a profound positive influence on so many generations of Hinghamites in his graciousness, tolerance, and kindness to others. He formed tomorrow's leaders without fanfare, simply by example. His contribution to our community is evidenced by my presence before you today. When I turned 21, I became a Hingham policeman. It was not uncommon to seek guidance of senior officers. One such officer was Sam Amonte. He was community policing before they had a name for it. Always approachable, friendly, ready to help, everyone respected and liked Sam. He was a churchgoer, and someone commented on his devotion to his faith. Sam hesitated, but he replied, "When my ship went down in the South Pacific, I was adrift at sea before being rescued and swore that if I ever got out of this, I'd go to church." Try to imagine him in those hostile waters surrounded by sharks amongst burning wreckage. I later learned that Sam was on the USS Princeton in the Leyte Gulf when it went down after it was hit by a Japanese bomber. Like the Quinns and Charlie Cushion, Sam served without fanfare and was a role model, a mentor, a friend to many. His humility and willingness to help others made him a valued member of our community and the police department in particular. Around that time, I married my wife, Esther. Her father, Edward Kandari, made a life in this town and raised 7 children here. His life was marked by integrity and dedication to family. The youngest of 16, Ed was a yeoman on the Lucky Lady, the USS Santa Fe in the South Pacific. He never spoke of his service, though, except once to comment that, quote, "the Marines had it rough." After his death, I read a book about the Santa Fe, which earned 13 battle stars. Only then did I learn of the extraordinary courage shown by the Navy on that ship. Ed saw the horror of Tarawa, Iwo Jima, the fanatical resistance of Leyte. He battled the kamikaze suicide bombers, hell-bent on hurling themselves into American ships. They were an implacable foe. Yet Ed never spoke of it, and the man I knew lived a life that was similar to the Quinns, Charlie Cushion, Sam Amonte, veterans who returned to Hingham with the quiet satisfaction of having served their country honorably and going on to live a life of quiet humility, service to others, and dedication and love for their families. These men served their country, and their shared sacrifices, dedication, and devotion to our nation formed an unspoken bond of brotherhood, never to be broken. Many of them retain this connection in the silence of their memories. Quite simply, they were ordinary men whose extraordinary courage preserved our way of life. As a selectman, I have spoken before on Veterans Day. I thank our citizens who stepped forward to serve in the uniform of our country, many of whom are not in this room today. Many live quietly in this town, content that their service to our nation was honorably rendered. I'm not sure that people I spoke of today realized at the time that their positive influence on our community would be felt to this day by all those who knew them. Veterans live everywhere in this town, whether it be the Fort Leonard Wood drill instructor, who later went on to steady the town's fiscal ship in extremely trying times, the naval intelligence officer whose invaluable advice to our effective governance cannot be overstated, or the military judge whose contributions to our town government continue today. I thank all of you. And as I continue in this great life journey through Hingham, I continue to meet veterans who serve to inspire. Several years back, I met Bill Quinn's son, also named Bill, after a Veterans Day ceremony. And as age kind of does it to you, I mistook him for his father. He politely asked me when the town hall was going to be painted, and we have talked from time to time since. I recalled my experience with his father and his uncles at their bike shop when I was a boy. When he told me that his uncle earned 2 silver stars, I was all the more impressed because of the modest nature of the man I knew as a child. And in an equally modest way, Bill related to me his own service in Vietnam. He flew helicopter gunships there, and he, like his uncle, earned a Silver Star during the Tet Offensive, when his company-sized unit held off an entire NVA regiment. What moved me the most, though, was the satisfaction in his voice when he related to me that he got all of his men home alive. That said something to me. In January 2016, I received a call from my soldier son at Fort Polk. I learned that Marine Corps Corporal Christopher Orlando's helicopter had got down in Oahu, Hawaii. In the very hard days that followed, we as a community did what we could to support the Orlando family during that agonizing time. It is undeniable that the loss of any one of Hingham's own leaves a void, but the loss of a serviceman brings a unique kind of emptiness. Christopher Orlando stepped forward for us, and his sacrifice was the ultimate cost that any citizen in our community accepts when they wear the uniform of our country. United by a singular purpose to serve his country, like those veterans of our community that came before him, Corporal Orlando tendered the ultimate sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. His tomorrows have been given to us. We must use them well. On this day, let us remember the men and women of our nation and of our community who stood willing to render their service and, if necessary, their lives, so that we can continue to enjoy the American way of life. God bless America.
Next, our principal speaker, Colonel Richard Smoot. Colonel Smoot has served for over 30 years in the United States Army. A native of Bridgewater, Massachusetts, the colonel graduated from the Boston University School of Management and was commissioned as an infantry officer in 1988. His assignments included rifle platoon leader, executive officer, company commander, and battalion commander. He also served in key staff assignments. These include battalion operations, battalion logistics, and brigade operations. After completing his command and staff assignments with the infantry, he was accepted for assignment into the 353rd Civil Affairs Command Airborne in 2004. There he served in a variety of key positions, including team leader, battalion, company commander, and executive officer. Colonel Smoot's operational deployments include service as the mobilization plans officer at Fort Drum in 2003, civil affairs team leader in Baghdad, Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and division engagements officer for the command of Multinational Division North in Iraq. In 2011, he was promoted to colonel and soon after was selected for brigade command, serving as the commander of the 354th Civil Affairs Brigade. Colonel Smoot's most recent assignment include Plan Chief with the 353rd Civil Affairs Command, responsible for providing trained and disciplined soldiers to combatant commanders worldwide for peacetime and war contingencies. Colonel Smoot is a graduate of the Infantry Officer Basic and Advanced Courses, the Combined Armed Services Staff School, Civilian Affairs Qualification Course, and the Command and General Staff College. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from Boston University and also his Master of Business Administration from Santa Clara University. Currently, Colonel Smoot is employed with Rapid7 as a security solutions engineer here in Boston. Awards and decorations or Legion, they include the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, Army Commendation Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, Army Achievement Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, Army Reserve Forces Achievement Medal, Army Reserve Components Overseas Training Ribbon, Expert Infantryman's Badge, and Combat Action Badge. Colonel Smoot is married to the former Jennifer Welding, and they have 2 children, Catherine and Stanley. Stanley is currently enrolled in ROTC
at Syracuse.
Colonel Smoothen.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's far too kind. I'd like to say thank you and welcome to the other elected officials of the town of Hingham, to the Veterans Appreciation Club from the Hingham High School. It's absolutely fabulous to see you here. To all the folks I saw from the VFW, the Legion, fellow veterans that I see out here today. I'm a day late, but I'd like to wish all those Marines a happy birthday. And I'd like to thank everyone who's joining us here on this fine Sunday morning. It is truly my honor to be here to address you this morning. As has been discussed and touched on a couple of times, today is the 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended the First World War. So I thought I would take a few minutes and reflect on the war, the armistice, and how that war led to Armistice Day as a holiday, and some other thoughts on that subject. In August of 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo, that of course led to a diplomatic crisis. And there was lots of going back and forth between governments and threats being made and so forth. But it was far from a foregone conclusion that a general war would break out as a result. In fact, there was a sense of complacency that there'd been peace throughout the majority of the 19th century and cooler heads would still prevail. Over the previous 10 years, there'd been multiple international diplomatic crises, things like the Morocco crisis, the Casablanca incident, the Bosnian crisis, and yet peace had prevailed each time. Books are still being written on a regular basis about exactly what was the difference and what led to all of Europe and ultimately all of the world going to war in August of 1914. And there's been many things put forward as the key cause. Was it the French desire for revenge after the Franco-Prussian War? Was it Austro-Hungarian militarism? Was it a weak government in Germany? Was it inflexible German railway tables? There is no one answer to that. But at the end of the day, in August of 1914, the war started. By the time that the Great War would finally end, it would take over 4 years, and over 13 million lives would be taken. The scale of the First World War at the time was completely unprecedented. And what started as Austria-Hungary seeking to punish Serbia by invading and conquering Serbia quickly led to the allied countries of both sides declaring war on each other, and it quickly mushroomed, and there was a war involving 32 countries across 5 continents. All told, approximately 67 million soldiers participated in World War I. Apologies, soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen for the first time. These are numbers that are simply incomprehensible. There had been certainly large wars in the past, but nothing on this scale. If you go back to the previous large set of wars during the Napoleonic period, Napoleon's Grand Army at 600,000 soldiers was considered enormous. And of course, this pales to the 67 million total participants. There have been wars with multiple combatants in several locations, but this scope was truly global for the first time. We're probably all most familiar with the Western Front in France, but there was also obviously huge fighting in Russia on the Eastern Front. There were campaigns in the Levant, in East Africa, and there were naval engagements from the North Sea to the Pacific to the Argentinian coast. As I mentioned, there have been multiple relatively smaller wars in Europe throughout the 19th century, but they'd all ended fairly quickly. And when the marching started in August of 1914, there was a sense that, oh, this will be another one of these quick wars and everyone will be home for Christmas. We've heard that before, right? It's interesting to look back on World War I, and one of the interesting challenges is that in our memory, from the point of view of our education and how we look at it, World War I has been completely overshadowed by World War II. What was completely unprecedented for the size, scale, and scope of a conflict in 1914 is now what, a fifth of the size of what we now call World War II, right? And so we have a hard time looking back at that. And as we study and read about it, maybe we're familiar with some of the events that happened over that 4-year period, but we don't spend a lot of time. We've heard of the First Battle of the Marne. We may have heard of the Race to the Sea. We've certainly heard of trench warfare, and maybe the Battle of the Somme or Verdun. But there's not a lot of connectedness to it. As you may have figured out by now, I've been reading books about World War I for years and years. It's kind of a favorite period in history of mine. And I could recite a lot of these facts to you, and I could probably tell you little trivia questions. My mother and my sister who are here this morning are grimacing and grinding their teeth because they've heard way too many of these. But I've had a great experience recently. I found a YouTube channel, believe it or not, 4 years ago, that started in August of 2014. And they would broadcast a 10-minute video every week, which was focused on being 10 minutes on 100 years ago this week. And it's been something that's absolutely brought that period in history alive to me. Because it's not simply a matter of there was a battle and this was the outcome. It was, what was the impact to the society? What was the impact politically? What were the other impacts, not only militarily, and how did those all tie together and come together on the battlefield and influence the outcome of the war? So I recommend it highly. It's called The Great War, and it's something that can really show you the pace of the war, of any large war on that scale, because we haven't seen anything like that, thank goodness, for quite some time. You know, there's an old saying about combat that it's long stretches of boredom punctuated by sheer terror. And I would say that the conduct of a long war is similar. And in watching this video series, it really filled in those gaps and showed me how those connected. And I thought that was very, very interesting. By 1917, the Germans had knocked Russia out of the war, but the United States had joined the war. So the Germans knew they probably couldn't win once the US Army arrived in force, along with the Marine Corps. But could they win before we got there? And so there was a rush by the Germans to move all those soldiers from Russia over into France. Germany conducted a number of enormous offensives in the spring of 1918, which gained a lot of territory, but were ultimately unsuccessful in achieving their strategic goal. After those offensives petered out, the US Army was building in force on a daily basis, and the Allies began a series of counterattacks. By the summer and into the early fall, the Allies were attacking up and down the Western Front, and the Germans were in retreat. As summer turned to fall, one by one, the Central Powers began to fall away out of the war and sue for peace. First Bulgaria, then the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally Germany. The German delegation arrived in the morning of the 8th of November in the forest of Compiègne at Field Marshal Foch's command post and began negotiations for an armistice. At 5 o'clock in the morning on the 11th, that armistice was signed. Later that morning, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent and the Great War came to an end. On November 11th, 1919, the first Armistice Day ceremonies were held at Buckingham Palace. And they had inaugurated the tradition of 2 minutes of silence. And traditionally, the first minute is for those who were killed in the war, and the second was for those that they left behind. Also on November 11th, 1919, President Woodrow Wilson issued a proclamation that concludes, "To us in America, reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it had freed us and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the Council of Nations." In 1938, Armistice Day was made a holiday in the US as Armistice Day. It continued to be celebrated as Armistice Day until 1954, when, to the inclusion of veterans from the Second World War and Korea, it was renamed to Veterans Day. So in conclusion, World War I was the first truly modern and global war. Its scope, its scale, and the death toll were on a level that were truly previously unimaginable. Not simply larger, but unimaginably larger. Not just military forces, but entire societies were mobilized in order to fight and to provision the conduct of the war. There's no other series of holidays for other wars that have ended. They've typically ended and people have gone on. But the scope and the scale of the sacrifice by entire societies was such that it demanded an extraordinary level of recognition. That level of recognition to pay respect to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice, to honor those that had served, to remember the horror of the experience, and to commit themselves to peace. There have, of course, been subsequent wars, but we should continue to recommit ourselves to those values, to continue to pay respect to those who've made the ultimate sacrifice, to honor all of those who have served. And so, to all of my brothers and sisters in arms throughout history, I'd like to wish you a happy Veterans Day.
I now invite the Hingham High School Band to perform God Bless America. We now move to the awards portion of the program. In keeping with tradition, I invite last year's recipient of the Veteran of the Year Award, Herman Mesmer, to make the presentation this year. Mr. Mesmer.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm so nervous, so exciting. It's with great pleasure I stand before you today as last year's recipient of Hingham's Veteran of the Year Award. As tradition has it, having the final honor of this position allows me to present this year's award. In a man who truly sets the bar for this prestigious award, and as outlined, the recipient must possess notable civic leadership, he be of strong moral character and a highly respected member of the community. This veteran founded and chaired the Hingham Veterans Council for many years, and has also led the most impressive effort on behalf of Hingham veterans by envisioning a monument which honors all those who served. He believes that every veteran deserves the same measure of gratitude, and this monument will stand as a perpetual reminder to the sacrifices and service of Hingham's own. Hingham's Medal of Honor recipient, Herbert L. Foss, is also memorialized each year, largely through his tenacity and persistence. The Hingham Intermodal Facility at the shipyard honors the name of Seaman Foss, and his presence is felt in the building. Joining the United States Army, he attended basic training at Fort Riley in Kansas and then OCS at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He was commissioned as a lieutenant during the Korean War with stateside orders that brought him to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. He commanded a battery of over 200 troops, which operated 8-inch howitzers, the most accurate field artillery weapon of its time. In 1961, he was honorably discharged from the Army. This veterans community service spans 52 years and consists of many volunteer activities such as school committee, public safety committee, personnel board, commander of the troops for various military celebrations, and chairman of the board for the Hingham Community Center. He and his wife raised 3 daughters in our community, and they continue to give back to Hingham in many ways as well. Please help me honor this U.S. Army veteran for all he continues to do for our community, state, and nation. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Jim Claypole.
It's my pleasure to render a few remarks that I think are important. And I want to talk to you about duty. And when 201 or 2, whatever it was, number of young enlisted men reported to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, an OCS Class 56 Love Battery, 44 of us graduated and were commissioned second lieutenants in the United States Army 26 weeks later. 4 of us stayed stateside, and as Herm mentioned, I went to Fort Bliss, Texas. I was assigned down there. But I want to tell you some of the traits that were inculcated in me throughout my entire life, and I follow them to this day. And one of them is duty. The duty that we all have to do our duty and to preserve those activities and rights that are around us and that serve us well. And I remember Mike Cunningham, who was the predecessor to the Chief German as a veteran service agent, came to me one day and said, "We need to form a Veterans Council, but there are opponents in the town hall who don't like that idea." And I said, "Mike, we'll overcome those problems." And I made a presentation to the Board of Selectmen, and they approved the formation of the Veterans Council. And it wasn't too long after that Cunningham came to me and said, "You know, we have veterans in this town who go to sleep at night hungry, and who go to sleep at night cold because they don't have oil in their tanks." And I said, "Mike, we're going to fix that." So we formed a fund that was funded initially by private contributions, and subsequently to this day, we have this veteran service account that's administered by the Veteran Service Officer. The money is on deposit with the treasurer of the town, and the Veteran Service Officer makes certain that we don't have anybody that goes to sleep. No veteran goes to sleep at night hungry. No veteran goes to sleep at night without any oil in his tank. And when the time comes, neither does his widow. So it's our responsibility, out of duty, to take care of those people. And I remember another time, the selectman came to me and said, with a rumpled piece of paper, we want to build a memorial in front of the town hall. Would you help us? And I said, no, I will build it. And we formed a group of citizens in this town. I was simply the quarterback. They did all the work, and we built the memorial at a cost of not 1 red cent to this town. And that memorial is built in less than 12 months. And I accepted that responsibility because it was my duty to do so. And another time, Cunningham came to me and said, you know, we have this Medal of Honor winner, a Hingham Medal of Honor winner. His name's Herbert L. Foss, and we haven't named a single blade of grass in this town after Foss. And I said, Mike, we'll solve that problem because it's our duty to do so. And we did. And we dedicated a memorial to Seaman Foss at the shipyard not too long ago, and it was my duty to undertake that responsibility. So, as you young people leave this hall today, I want you to remember that you must do your duty. I don't want you to be watchers. I want you to be doers. You make things happen. Get involved in your community and be sure that your community is improved by your participation. And I have always followed that tradition in my own life because I shall always do my duty as God gives me the light to see them.
From the General Court of Massachusetts. Be it hereby known to all, the Massachusetts House of Representatives offers its sincere congratulations to James Claypool in recognition of your being honored with the Hingham 2018 Veteran of the Year Award and your tireless dedication to supporting veterans in your community. The entire membership extends its very best wishes and expresses the hope for future good fortune and continued success in all endeavors. Given this 11th day of November 2018 at the State House, Boston, Massachusetts, signed Robert A. DeLeo, Speaker of the House, offered by Joan Machino, State Representative. And the second one, State Senate official citation. Be it known that the Massachusetts Senate hereby extends its congratulations to James Claypool for recognition of being named the Town of Hingham's 2018 Veteran of the Year and for your dedicated service to the country. And be it further known that the Massachusetts Senate extends its best wishes for continued success, that this citation be duly signed by the President of the Senate and attested to, and a copy thereof transmitted by the Clerk of the Senate, signed Karen E. Spilka, President of the Senate, William F. Welch, Clerk of the Senate, offered by Senator Patrick M. O'Connor, dated November 11, 2018.
Am I dismissed?
Invite forward our Veteran Service Officer and invite you to take your seats.
Thank you. Another round of applause for Jim Claypool. Thank you, Jim. So this summer we had a grand ceremony here marking the 65th anniversary of the end of the Korean War. And we were honored to have members of the Korean War who had served from Hingham present at that time. So 65 years ago, when it ended, no peace treaty was ever signed, which is why some 30,000 troops still remain in the Korean Peninsula today, serving along the demilitarized zone as a deterrent. Today, this community has chosen to make certain that we never forget the 1.6 million U.S. veterans of this war, and especially the 36,576 who died there and were properly recognized and more memorialized. For they served without question or reservation for their just cause, or as we just heard, it was their duty to keep America and her allies free. So we wish to thank again all our Korean War veterans. And at this time, I will ask that all Korean War veterans please rise for our applause. Thank you. Please be seated. At this time, it is also my distinct pleasure to present the Korean Ambassador for Peace Medal to the following men of Hingham who served, and one we will receive posthumously as her loved one has passed. When your name is called, please rise to receive your medal from the Hingham High School Veterans Appreciation Council so they can seek you out. And we'll hold our applause till all three are standing. Sergeant Carmine Mazzulli, United States Army. Private First Class William Schmidt, United States Marine Corps. For Private First Class James Flett, United States Marine Corps, his wife Dorothy, please rise. Thank you. At this time, please allow me to make an additional recognition of Eagle Scout Connor Power of the Mayflower Council Troop 1, who is also the eldest son of Selectman Mary Power. A few years ago, Connor attended an Eagle Scout Court of Honor at the Grand Army of the Republic Memorial Hall. He was very impressed with the collection of military memorabilia, photos, and uniforms that have been assembled largely by dedicated town volunteers. When he learned that the GAR Hall relies heavily on donations to maintain it, he decided to pursue performing his Eagle Scout project at the hall. After discussion with the trustees, Connor decided to focus his project on making exterior improvements to Grand Army Hall, specifically to re-landscaping the hill at the foot of the driveway to make it more visually appealing and to control the erosion problem that we had there. Connor and his volunteer team removed debris and weeds from the hill, placed soil, put down loam, planted 600 plants to minimize erosion, and installed railroad ties at the top and bottom of the hill to further make that management. He raised $715 to purchase supplies, enlisted the assistance of other scouts, secured assistance from the DPW in watering the plants once planted, and the property itself. GAR Hall does not have an outdoor water source, so Connor filled and transported large jugs throughout the summer to ensure the plants would remain healthy during the hot summer that we had. A total of 138 hours
were spent by this young man on this project, including his time, 61 hours of other Scouts volunteer time, and I know some adults were there. Connor will be donating any surplus funds that he received to the Friends of the GAR Hall. However, Connor could not be with us today as he is attending a leadership program in New Jersey for his Eagle Scout program. So I'd like to present this challenge coin from the Hingham Veterans Council to his mother, Selectman Mary Power.
In accordance with the Massachusetts World War I Centennial Commission, which urges honoring the memory of those who served and died in the Great War, I invite our town clerk, Eileen McCracken, to read the names of those Hingham men who perished in the Great War. The reading will be followed by the playing of Amazing Grace by Hingham High School student Lucas Weber. Ms. McCracken.
Those who died in service: Harold C. Barrett, Ernest Campbell, Edward B. Cole, M. Everett Delory, Edmund F. Magner, Coet S. Roger, Alexander R. Borland, William F. Kavanaugh, Walter I. Cross, James A. Parker, Albert A. Ross. Those who died in Allied service: Urban J. Cronin, Gerald A. Curry, Ivan Curry, Gerald Goad. May they all rest in peace.
I'd invite you all, please, now to rise as Jay Ippolito returns to give the benediction, and I ask you also to remain standing as we retire the colors.
Break.
Heavenly Father, as we prepare to depart from this gathering, help us to remember always that our veterans are precious gifts to us and to this great nation. Today, we honor them, walk in their path of duty, and hold in our hearts the cause of freedom. Dear God, never let us forget what our veterans have done for us, and let the appreciation of their service be held in the highest regard always by future generations of Americans. God bless our veterans, and God bless America. Amen.
Amen. Detail, attend, halt! Parade, colors, bugler, sound retreat! Ready, set, halt! Order! Halt!
This concludes our Veterans Day ceremony. Thank you for being here, and thank all veterans for their service to our nation.